All right, folks, welcome to another episode of Beyond the Noise, Signals, Stories, and Spicy Takes, the show where we dig into the stories of the people shaping the future of app-based computing with a special focus on mobile. I'm your host, Matt Klein, co-founder and CTO of Bitdrift, as well as the founder of Envoy Proxy. Each episode will talk with engineers, founders, and technical leaders who've transformed the way their companies build and understand what's happening inside their systems. We'll dig into the challenges, the breakthroughs, the lessons learned, and we'll wrap it all up with their hottest takes. So let's dive in. Today, I am thrilled to have Cedric Beust, who is a seasoned software executive with more than 30 years of experience in software engineering and a deep technical expertise covering back-end, front-end, mobile infrastructure, machine learning, graphics, testing, and security. He is a hands-on Rust and Kotlin coder by night and a tech lead by day, and has shipped dozens of products that are still active today and used by millions of users. He was one of the early members of the Android team. He created the Android Gmail application and the popular TestNG and JCommander Java libraries. He has filed over 20 patents, published 2 books, and obtained his PhD in computer science from the University of Nice in France. Welcome, Cedric.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, fantastic to have someone with such an extensive amount of experience on the show. So thank you for joining. And you know how I love to start is just tell us a bit about you. How did you get into computing? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Okay, I'll try to keep it short because, as you mentioned, I've been doing this for a very long time. But I was very fortunate to have a computer in my house at a very young age, thanks to my dad, whom I convinced to buy an early computer in the 80s. It was an Apple II. I became absolutely fascinated by this machine, which at first I played games on, of course. But I got intrigued by coding at a very, very early age, and so I started trying to write some games and utilities and things like that. And first in BASIC, I think, like a lot of us started back in the days. And then I expanded my horizons into other languages. And it was pretty obvious for me from a young age that this is what I wanted to do. This was my profession. So I did all my studies in France, and then I moved to the US about 25 years ago, based in the Bay Area. And I've been there ever since in Silicon Valley, in the heart of where computer science happens.
Yeah. So which games did you play on the Apple II, if you can remember? Because I mean, as we're probably not too different in age, and I also have memories from the 80s of playing games on the Apple II. But I'm curious if you remember what games they were.
Oh, I remember vividly for a couple of reasons. First of all, because a lot of these games are etched in my memory because they really shaped my childhood and my early contact with computers. But also because for the past 5-10 years, I've been very interested in emulators, and I've written a bunch of emulators, including 2 Apple II emulators, one in Kotlin first, and then I ported it to Rust and expanded it. So the short answer is that I know exactly what games these are because I've actually played them just in the past few years, just for nostalgia's sake. But I grew up with games such as Prince of Persia, with Conan, with a lot of text adventures, the King's Quest.
Yeah.
Also were very, very vivid in my memory. Some of the early Zork also, the text-only adventure games, the Choplifter, Aztec, plenty of these games. I don't know if some of these ring a bell with you.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, from when I was a young kid, I definitely have some memories of, taking one of those big floppy disks and putting it in there and trying to get one of those games working, for sure. Yeah, those are fond memories, for sure. Well, I guess tell us a bit about, you got to Silicon Valley, and obviously you've had a pretty storied career there. Obviously, since this is a mobile-focused show, at least initially, would love to learn more about how you wound up at Google and how you wound up on the Android team. And I'm sure you have some exciting stories from the early days of Android as well.
Oh yes, so many stories and so many incredible happy memories. These were definitely some of the happiest times for me as an engineer. I lucked out, I think. So I joined Google around 2003, so it was still in the early days of Google. Google was already close to the IPO and all that, so they were already pretty famous. But a lot of the things that they were doing were still very, very at an early stage, and it was at the time mostly still a search company that was doing money with AdWords. So when I joined, and I came with a back-end background. Before that, I was at BEA WebLogic. Before that, I was at Sun. So I had been working on backend for a long time. And back then, when you joined Google, by default, you were going to the AdWords team because this is where the money was. So for about a year and a half, I worked on the back end, and I started thinking that I'm getting a little bit bored because I don't feel like I'm learning much. So I looked around and I think, is there anything new happening at Google that would be something that I can learn? And I heard about the mobile team at Google, which at the time had something like 5 people. That's the amount of people that Google had working on mobile. And I thought, well, I don't know a thing about mobile, so I'm going to join the Google team.
Well, also, I mean, in 2003, that was obviously pre-Android, so they hadn't acquired Android yet. So by the mobile team, what was the mobile team doing? Was it like mobile browser, mobile web pages? Like what was it?
Well, yeah, not much. So by then it was more 2004, 5. So the Android acquisition was close to happening, and I'll get to that in a moment. But you're right. Back then, all we had was called feature phones, right? I don't know if you remember some of these.
Course.
They were the Nokia, Candy, the StarTAC, the Motorola, all these. And they're called feature phones, which is kind of ironic right now because they didn't have a lot of features. They were very, very low memory, very poor display. They crashed a lot, very hard to have radio working reliably and all that. But Google was exploring, trying to port some of their application to these mobile phones. And so when we were meeting, once a week with the mobile team, and again, we fit in a pretty tiny room, I started thinking, all right, what could I do for Google in the mobile space? And I decided I'm going to do Gmail. So we're talking, again, pre-Android, right? We're not yet at Android Gmail. Yep. We're just at Gmail on feature phone. So I started this by myself. I was the only person on the team first. And then as we grew, started expanding a little bit. But I didn't really know what I was signing up for. As I said, I had no knowledge whatsoever on mobile. But as it turned out, programming mobile at the time was very painful. There was, the development environment was non-existent. Like I said, they were extremely constrained in memory, in CPU, in everything. No debugging tools. So it was an absolute nightmare. But somehow, after about a year and a half working on that project, and we ended up with a team of about 20 people and 5 engineers working on this, we published Gmail on feature phones.
But that would have been, at that time, I'm guessing, like if you were programming for like a Motorola or Razr or like a Symbian phone or whatever, I'm assuming they all had different SDKs and different libraries. So when you say that you did Gmail on a feature phone, like was it for all of them or one or two, or like how? I guess I'm just curious, like to get into the weeds a bit, how much code was shared, right? Like versus having to write it for all of these different SDKs.
Well, surprisingly, quite a big amount was shared because we only targeted J2ME phones.
Oh, okay, got it.
So we didn't touch, Brew. There were other SDKs that were, C only and all that. We did not touch these. All we had is, Java specialists on our teams. So on one hand, there was the standard that Sun had published. Right, there were three different Javas. There was J2ME, which was for mobile phones. There was J2SE, which is the standard edition, and there was J2EE, which is the enterprise edition. And each of them a different size. So J2ME was for mobile only. And most of these feature phones that we just named were running J2ME. So the good news, it sounds like, all right, so you have one unified API, so it should have been pretty easy to write the same code that works everywhere, right? Yeah, of course not. So J2ME, as it turned out, was extremely underspecified. And it was very easy for any phone, any vendor to claim that they were J2ME compliant, but really only supporting a subset and very, undocumented or very poorly supported part of J2ME. So there was still quite a big amount of porting or very specific code that was written for all these phones, but overall there was still a uniform code base that everything was based on.
Okay, so let's talk more. So you shipped that, and then it hopefully worked, and then what happened next?
Yeah, so we shipped and on approximately 300 devices, and then we started working on Gmail 1.1, right, the next version. And it's around that time that the Android acquisition happened. So Google acquired Android. Andy Rubin and his team came on board. And Andy reached out to me pretty quickly, and he sat me down and he said, here is, I'm writing an operating system from scratch. It's going to be based on Java. And so we need, first of all, Java engineers. We also need people who understand the Java ecosystem, because on my team right now, I have mostly C, low-level kernel driver engineers. And by the way, even though these people were mostly C programmers, they all agreed that that operating system should be based on Java. So that already piqued my curiosity. I'm thinking, wow, that's pretty open-minded, because usually these worlds don't really collide very well. There is not a lot of intersection between people who are very low level and who think that every byte of memory is important versus people who are working on a JVM with a garbage collector. But no, these engineers were already incredibly open-minded, and to Andy, it made there was no doubt that the new operating system should be based on Java. So he told me, we need Java, we need someone who knows the Java ecosystem, who would be able to create all these APIs that Java engineers would feel immediately comfortable with. And obviously, Android is going to have to run Gmail. And you know Gmail pretty well on mobile, so we really have to have you on board. So I didn't need any convincing, right? That's right. Where do I sign? I'm being asked to create an operating system from scratch, and this is the dream of any engineer. So I joined the Android team. So I stopped working on Gmail for Feature Phone, and right away I started working on Android, which at the time the operating system was close to non-existent. Right? It's really starting from the bottom. So I was tasked with.
So what? I actually don't know this. What did Google acquire then? Like, what did the Android team have when they joined? Because I guess I was under the naive impression that they were further along, but it sounds like, based on what you're saying, that they were still starting. So I'm actually curious.
Yeah, a bit of both, right? I mean, they had a lot of experience gained by creating the Sidekick, which was a very successful phone at the time, and a lot of the architecture they had put in place for the Sidekick they reused, so they were able to rewrite it, because they had to rewrite it. They didn't carry over that code, obviously. So a lot of it was already in place, and a lot of the APIs that people are using today on Android, things like activities, intents, and the way the system works, all of this was already in some embryonic form in the mind of all the engineers who are already ready to develop this. Okay. So it still kind of started almost from scratch, but not really from a conceptual.
Makes sense. Scratch. Got it. Yeah. Yeah. And then I guess before we get into working on the team, I would love to ask you just in general, because I think if you look at the history of the two major platforms, obviously Android picked Java, Apple obviously started with Objective-C, and now they moved to Swiss, like two very, very different paths. And, I've heard very different opinions from people over the years, and even on the show, about whether Java was the right thing for Android. And I'd just love to hear from you, based on your experience both then and over the last 20, 25 years, do you still think that was the right call for Android?
Well, obviously it worked out. Now the question is, could it have been something else? I'm not sure. There weren't a lot of languages back then that could have been a good contender. I think at the time Java was starting to be fast enough that it could run decently well on mobile platforms, and we had proved that with the Gmail for Feature Phone. Yep. The JIT was there already, so that the JIT made a big difference on the JVM, starting making things going fast. But also an important point is that Android had to rewrite a VM from scratch, right? They are not using the JVM. You will never see the word JVM in any of the Android documentation. As you probably know, there was a lot of litigation between Sun and Google on that topic. So they reinvented everything from scratch. But by then, I think Java was fast enough that speed was not really a concern. Memory, always a concern when you're running in a garbage collected environment. But because the Android team was able to create a VM that was extremely specialized for mobile, they were able to at least avoid these pitfalls of having too much memory pressure and having underpowered CPUs to run their language. So I think overall it was a great choice, because the ecosystem also in Java was starting to be pretty good. We had good ideas that were starting to really emerge, and application servers. There was a lot of activity. Sun was riding very, very high. So overall, I think it's a choice that made a lot of sense. And as I said, I ended up working out pretty well.
Yeah. All right. Great. All right. So let's go back to your time on Android, and I would imagine, as you said, it's every engineer's dream to work on a V1 product like that. You have no technical debt to speak of, but I'm sure at the time you I don't know, probably have a lot of interesting stories. So take us through a little bit of what it was like to work on it during that time.
Yeah, so it was magical for the 5 years that I was there. Like I said, we were working on the operating system and also building the apps in parallel. And so there was a lot of back and forth where sometimes literally we needed a feature to develop the app. And whether it was Gmail, which I was working on, or Calendar, or some of the other apps, sometimes the functionality was just not there in the operating system. So we just had to go to the operating system team, which at the time was pretty much all of us, and first of all implement that functionality in Android before we can build the app on top of it. So there was a lot of very, very exciting sessions where we were inventing new things, trying to a mix of using concepts that already exist in operating systems, but also trying to come up with new ways to do things.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of that. There was also a lot of interesting stories because the relationship between Google and Apple started to get a bit contentious. At the time, we knew that they were working on the iPhone. Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO of Google at the time, was on the board of Apple, and he had pretty much weekly meetings with Steve Jobs about this. And on a regular basis, Eric would come in and tell us a little bit what happened and how Steve Jobs felt and what they're doing, but at the same time also telling us to really try to ignore as much as possible of anything we hear about the iPhone, which was still very, very under wraps. But we could still hear some rumors and things like that. But It was very essential, and Steve Jobs had made this very clear to Eric, that you are not allowed to use any of our stuff. And if ever you start infringing on some of our stuff, we're going to have a problem.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, but also I would imagine that even at that time, either you were preparing to or knew that you were going to, for example, have the Gmail application on iPhone. So I would imagine that also creates an interesting, I don't know, but not conflict, but it's an interesting dynamic over the years where you're developing your own platform. You want it to be awesome, but obviously iPhone has massive market share as well. So you want all of the Google apps to also run very well on that platform. I don't know if you can say anything about that, but I just find that very interesting when you have these things that are kind of competing, but also complementary as well.
So what you're saying is true, but it wasn't true at the time. So remember, first of all, we had no idea what the iPhone was going to be, right? And when it came out, if you remember, it did not have an SDK. It did not have third-party apps. The version 1.0 of the iPhone only allowed Apple apps on it. And you were supposed to write apps by doing web stuff.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Steve Jobs changed his mind for version 2, probably a bit under the pressure of Android, because we came out right away with, of course, we have a store, we have apps, and we accept third-party apps. And I'm not sure how much of that had an impact on him changing his mind, but he clearly saw the writing on the wall. And by the time iPhone 2 came out, then he opened up to third-party apps. And this is probably, I don't remember, I wasn't really involved in that. I don't think the Android team was really interested in writing any apps for the iPhone, probably for a long time, because it took a while also for the iPhone, just like for Android, to actually take off and start making a dent in the market.
Yeah, okay. So while you were on the Android team, were you mostly focused on both the operating system and working on the Gmail app? I would imagine over 5 years you worked on various pieces of it as well.
Yeah, so for the first year, I was doing just like everybody else on the team, everything. I was doing both operating system stuff, or at least consulting, or at least being involved in a lot of the decisions, while building the app in lockstep with the operating system. But of course, the team grew very, very quickly, and after a year or so, we had independent teams that were all working on certain sections. So people started working a little bit more in their own lane. And by then things were getting pretty solid from a foundation standpoint. Yep. So I was focusing more and more on the app itself and less on everything else.
Yeah. So you spent the 5 years that you were on the team at that point, then working mostly on the app side of things. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
I was until I left. I was still working on a different app by the time I left. I think the last year was on a different app, but everything before that was just working on a Gmail for Android.
just from I guess from like a engineering perspective, did you have a preference for working on the app side of things versus the operating system? I mean, it seems like there's, they're obviously very different disciplines, and like I can see how some people would be drawn to one or the other. I'm just curious about you.
I think, yeah, I mean, I would have been interested in either, but there were so many interesting problems to write Gmail on Android, and especially since we're also writing the view system at the same time. So we were able to shape the view system to be able to do things that enable Gmail and Calendar and all these other apps as well. So I was never thinking, it would be more interesting to work on something else. No. Yeah. All these years working on Gmail was every day was a new challenge and new things to solve and new problems it's no regrets at all on that front.
Before we go to what was after that, I do love asking people, what was your favorite bug during that time? Is there one epic bug that you can remember from that time?
So not really from that time, but I can tell you about one that happened at one of my previous employments, which I still remember today.
Yeah,
because
sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So I was working on WebLogic in application servers. And so these application servers were running a lot of different servers. One of them was a web server. And at some point, we were generating base 64 strings in the URL, which captured cookies and things like that. And we received a bug report saying that there was profanity in the URLs that we were generating. And so we were very dumbfounded by that. And so we asked the other person to show us the URL. And so they gave us the URL, and it was a very long URL with all these characters. And clear as day, in the middle of it were the words FUCK. And we wondered what happened, and looking at the code, it was just pure randomness, right? If you generate enough of these strings, at some point there's going to be profanity like this. So we absolutely were cracked by that. The fix was super easy, by the way. We disallowed vowels. So from this point on, all the URLs and logics were containing only consonants, and that solved the problem. So that was not really a bug, but something that I love telling this story because it still haunts me in a good way today.
That is fantastic. Okay, so you left the Android team. I guess tell us a bit about why you left and what you did after that.
Yeah, it was actually a hard decision because, in all honesty, I could have spent the next 30 years of my life at Google and retire a happy engineer. There is no better place, really, for an engineer to be than working at Google, at least at the time. I don't know what it's like today. Here it's a bit different. But a part of me also looked back and I was thinking, well, you've been in Silicon Valley for, 12 years or something, and you've never experienced a startup. And so I had a little bit of curiosity, and I still felt I have a bit fire in me. I still can experiment. So I decided I need to do this. Otherwise, I'm starting to enter my comfort zone, and again, I'll be very happy, but I will probably feel that something is missing. So I made the decision to leave, and the goal was in the following few years to try the startup experience, starting from the ground up in a very, very small team. So I set my path in this direction, but I'll tell you, the first 6 months after leaving Google, I second-guessed myself all the time. Every day, every week, I thought, I'm going to go back to Google. I miss it too much. But I held strong, and I tried to really make this happen for me, and eventually I was at peace with my decision. I understood, and I was doing something different. So after Google, I went to LinkedIn, not really a startup, but at the time, LinkedIn was still pretty small. It was about 500 people, more like a smaller version of Google, like Google used to be maybe 10 years prior to that. And then after that, I finally got a chance to experiment, with a startup, being in a small team of 4 people in a tiny office at downtown Palo Alto, trying to create things from scratch. And so I got a chance to experience that.
And how did that go?
The startup did okay. We worked on it for a couple of years. We grew up to about 30 people, and we were acquired by LinkedIn of all places. I went to LinkedIn, then that startup, and then LinkedIn acquired our startup.
And then when you went to LinkedIn, were you also working on mobile then, or did you go back to working on back-end systems? Like what was your journey in terms of the types of technologies that you were working on during that time?
That's a fantastic question. That's actually the question that the person that I was reporting to asked me. So what do you want to work on? We have a nascent Android team. You're very welcome to take the lead and help us with our mobile app. And my answer was absolutely not.
Why was your answer absolutely not?
Because, well, I just came out of 5 years of Android and mobile development, and I was ready to do something different. So I told them anything but mobile. Not because I hated mobile, just because I wanted to do something different. So I ended up going back to backend. So I did some backend stuff, and then I switched to infrastructure, and I helped them build up their infrastructure, their testing infrastructure, because testing is also something that I have a keen interest for a long time. So I just want to do something different. Whenever I change job, I try to do something, at least change one variable, right? All jobs have multiple parameters. At least I want one of them to change in a significant way, so I feel I'm learning and growing and doing something different.
So then what did your startup do, the one that got acquired by LinkedIn?
So the product was super interesting. I think it was a bit hard to pull off looking back, but the idea was that we were going to help you meet new people. So for example, for people who meet a lot of new people, such as HR, recruiting, or if you're in marketing or things like that, you tend to have appointments or meetings with people that you don't really know much because you're just meeting them for the first time. And the idea was that we would gather some intelligence on that person, and we would give you what we call a dossier, which is a French word, but it's also an English word,
sure.
Which is a file that will tell you exactly as much information as we could gather about that person by crawling a lot of things. Anything that is public that we're allowed to access, but everything we can find on that person, we would be able to tell you what school they went to. Maybe we can find, vacation pictures from their Facebook wall. We'll tell them, oh, they're just back from Germany. They're also connected with that person who's also a friend of yours and things like that. So I think it was a very challenging idea, and we pushed it as far as we could. We did a pretty interesting job, and sometimes some of the files that were generated this way was kind of mind-boggling. And we're talking 2013 or 14. So nothing like LLM and AI that we have.
I was going to say, I mean, it almost seems like that's ahead of its time, like based on what you can do now. But I'm actually curious, were the biggest problems that you ran into, was it technical, or was it just that the information wasn't public, so you couldn't get enough information on each person?
Yeah, it's a mix of both, right? We had to, first of all, only access things that are public, but for some of the social networks that we had access to, we had maybe some tokens or some keys that allowed us to have a little bit more access. But fundamentally, what really limited us and limited the startup is that we were at the mercy of all these main social networks. Mm-hmm. So first of all, even though we were querying over 100 different social networks, realistically, the bigger ones and the ones that gave us the most information were LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, or was Instagram a thing back then? Or Pinterest, things like that, but the major ones, right? But if one day they decide that they're going to throttle you, throttling was a big issue for us because we had to be careful, or they just cut you off because they feel that you're just grabbing information from them that is beyond their terms of API access, then they're going to shut you down. So that was the risk with that startup.
So then when it got folded back into LinkedIn, did it get killed, or did it just kind of get built into LinkedIn product? What happened to it?
Yeah, it got absorbed because LinkedIn was doing something similar. They had already, they were set on a similar direction. I think we got there before them, which is why we probably got their attention in the first place. But they already have all the data that we were using, so they were in a much better position to offer a lot more content on this kind of thing. So, so since I didn't join, I decided to walk away from LinkedIn. I'm not quite sure what the team ended up working on there. Yeah. But I think they killed our product, but they probably integrated some of the ideas and some of the concepts that we had into LinkedIn proper.
Yeah. Did you not join because the thought of working at a big company after you had done the startup was too hard to stomach, or what was the reason for not joining?
No, not at all. I decided I wanted to go back to a big company, but I just didn't want to go back to LinkedIn. Again, it's not new anymore, right? It's I want something different.
So what was next after that then?
After that, I went to Yahoo. And I joined, and I went back on the mobile side this time. I joined as a mobile architect, and I ended up working in close partnership with one of my former buddies from the Android teams, who was at Yahoo, who kind of sold me on the job, and he said it was great. And he was right. I had a fantastic time. I was there for a few years. And but this time I was operating at a higher level, right? Architect, no longer hands-on, although I stayed hands-on on my personal time, but I was no longer writing code during my day job, but still doing a lot of reviews and design and things like that, still technically involved, but no longer writing code, just advising a lot of the teams there on the proper directions and things to do to crash less, to have better performance and better app, more responsive and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know, this might be a good way of, moving into your current job, but I feel like as I've talked to people on this show, I guess in the time frame that you're talking about, it's probably in the mid 2010s or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, a lot has happened in the last 10 years, but at the same time, I feel like many of the problems that are inherent in mobile development, I know some of them have not really improved. And I find that very interesting, right? Because I feel like in many areas of our industry, if I think about how different things are from 10 years ago, I mean, things in technology change so fast. But in mobile, I don't know, it's like a lot of the same problems. So I guess I'd love to learn more from you around, what were some of the big problems that Yahoo, for example, was facing 10 years ago, and how many of those are still a problem now?
You're spot on, and I know this is exactly the area you work in, but you're spot on in the sense that the problems that I was trying to solve at Yahoo, we had similar problems maybe 5 or 10 years prior to that, and I still have these same problems today at my current employment.
Right.
I mentioned, crash rates, performance, animation speed, size of the application, authentication, logging, all of this. Now, they transcend, right, just mobile. We always have these problems. We solve them maybe a little bit better, but we still don't have any silver bullet for any of them. It still requires a lot of efforts from humans, and maybe now a little bit more AI that is coming to help. But for the most part, it still takes a lot of time to get these right.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, yes, obviously certain things have improved. I mean, we have better technology to deal with giant, code bases, and we can build them better, although I'm not sure how good that actually is. But I feel like, and again, I realize I'm biased here, I don't think the observability capabilities have improved that much, of course, other than our company. But I obviously have to say that. But I mean, I think in general, people still struggle with all of these things. And I don't know, I guess that's a good way of stepping back and just very briefly take us from, obviously you were at Yahoo and then you've done other jobs and now you're at, now you're at JP Morgan. I guess I'd love to just touch on, I guess first, how did you get to JP Morgan? And then beyond that, would love to just dig in terms of what are some of the big problems that you're seeing. It doesn't have to be within JP Morgan specifically, but what are some of the big problems that your teams are facing right now? And I guess just to come back, how many of them are the same problems, and how many of them are new?
Yes. So how did I end up at JP Morgan? Well, again, I think it ended up being mostly a curiosity for me. I was just trying to look for my next job. And like you said, I was no longer at Yahoo then. I can skip over the companies that I went to. But it was always my quest for, I'm going to look for a new job now and I'd like to do something different. And JP Morgan reached out to me and I'm thinking, well, a bank, now that's interesting. So I started talking to them, but also in the back of my mind, there was this curiosity that I had always had. So as someone who immigrated to the US in a new country about 25 years ago, when you do this, you have to learn a lot of things, not just the language and all that, but there's the culture and the financial system, among other things. Everything was different from France. So I had to learn how banks work, how credit cards work, checking account, investment account. A lot of this was new, also managing stocks and things like that. So like everybody who immigrated, I had to take a crash course, right? Just understand the bare minimum so that at least I don't do anything stupid with my money. But I feel that during all this time, I've never really gone further than the surface. I've just learned the bare minimum, and it always bothered me. And there's always been this thing in the back of my mind where one day I'd like to learn a bit more about the finance system in the US. Understand more how it works so I can be a bit more savvy, first of all, about my personal investment and my money, but just for the sake of learning new things. So this has always been in the back of my mind. And so when JP Morgan Chase reached out to me, that curiosity came back right away. And so immediately started talking to them. And I went through the interviews. I was very impressed. And to be honest, I came with a little bit of skepticism, right? I'm thinking, hey, I worked in Silicon Valley for a while, very, bleeding edge technology. What kind of bank really do that is technically interesting? I was proven wrong very quickly on this. The way I was interviewed, the way anything that was disclosed to me during the interview process, the people that I talked to, I walked away from this thing. I need to change the way I look at this. These people know what they're doing. So Go ahead.
I think too that so I guess first I would say I myself in my career have had the same bias, and as I got more involved in open source and I got more exposed to other companies outside of the Silicon Valley area, you open your eyes and you realize there are a lot of sophisticated people working in these vertical industries. The other thing, that I think about banking, and I have not worked in banking, so would love to learn more from you about it, is that a lot of these Silicon Valley companies, as much as we like to applaud the scale and how important they are, at the end of the day, we're serving ads or we're serving social networks or we're doing all these things. And it's like, if they fail, it's really not that big of a deal. In the banking situation, that is not the case. Like, it is a very, very, very big deal. I mean, these systems have to be super reliable. So I don't know. It's like, would love to, I guess, first just learn from you around what was it like actually moving, from a bunch of these other companies where, again, yes, they're very high scale, but and people like to talk about reliability, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter that much. Whereas in the banking world, it matters a lot. So would love to learn about that.
So where to start? The first thing that I noticed is that as soon as I started working in JP Morgan Chase, I realized that what they're doing from a mobile standpoint is very similar, almost identical to every other company I've ever worked at. Everyone who's in the mobile business has to handle the same problems and has to use very similar technologies. There is choice for vendors and SDKs that you can use, and depending on what you need, you're going to pick one over the other. But overall, the functionality and the need is exactly the same. So that's the first thing. So right away, it felt comfortable. It was not a brand new world. It was a world that had some additional constraints. Now, obviously, as you pointed out, there is a regulation. We have to be a lot more careful about certain things. Like you say, if Facebook or Instagram has a bug, and sometimes the feed of a person doesn't really work correctly or displays the wrong article, not a big deal. But if we miss a transaction or if we duplicate money transfer, that is a big deal. It's not just about money loss, but it's about liability and can have a very, very hard consequences. So that was part of my interest also. I wonder, how can I operate a mobile business with these added constraints, and how do they hamper, get in the way of actually shipping good software? So I've learned tons of things in that area. And otherwise, like I said, the problems are the same, and we can dive a little bit more into it since if you want to.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to, just because I think what's interesting is, you would probably not disagree that there's common themes that a lot of mobile teams face, right? I mean, big organizations, their builds are too slow, or they have observability problems, or they have reliability problems, or those types of things, or they have performance problems. But every team seems to focus on different things, or maybe at the time, what they're struggling with the most is different. So I guess just would love to learn from you in terms of what are the biggest problems that your teams are facing today. And as I was mentioning before, just based on your extensive experience, would also love to thread that back from some of your previous jobs, because as I said, for some of the stuff like around build performance or IDE performance or those kinds of things, I feel like we haven't actually made as much progress as we probably should. And a lot of these problems people are still facing. But again, just would love to get your perspective on it.
So we keep going back to that word, observability. And just like you and I feel this is probably where the main pain is still present for me after all these years. We have a lot more visibility now in what apps do, but it's still a pain to extract it and to interpret it. For some reason, we haven't really made that much progress. But the main thing here is that I do not want to fly blind, right? I don't want to ship an app and then have no idea what the users are doing and just being completely reactive of, oh, no, we have a crash. How do we find out? Ideally, I like to find out what's leading to that crash way before that. And I even want to know what users are doing when things go well, because this will also instruct what we're doing and how we can improve things. So right now we have obviously a lot more tools at our disposal for observability. We're able to upload a lot of telemetry. The amount of data that we upload to Splunk and to other things like that, just like, is mind-boggling. The amount of money that goes there and the traffic and the bandwidth, it's humongous. And that comes with its own problem, which is now you have this huge amount of data that is stored somewhere, and how do you retrieve it and slice and dice it in a way that makes sense and that you can interpret, and that will then inform your decisions on how to course correct or to improve things. And for this, we're still very much at the early ages of how to do this right, because we're still trying to figure out how to do it right.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I would love to learn more about is I would imagine that for your stable of apps, and obviously JP Morgan Chase has lots of different apps, I would imagine that your crash-free rate is pretty good. I mean, it's like most established apps, they don't crash that often. But as I like to say, there are many other problems that, users can face that are not crashing, right? It's like obviously UI hangs or performance issues or force quits or like whatever else. I mean, there are many, many, many things. And I guess, do you feel that your teams are still, I don't know, partly because of their focus areas or because of the tools that they have available, are they still focused primarily on the crashing issues, or are they starting to look beyond crashes into, as you were talking about, like both the good and the bad flows? You actually want to understand where the user's getting stuck, where are they not converting, right? And those are not necessarily crashing situations. So I guess what I'm asking maybe in a simpler way is, how do you think about like crashing issues versus non-crashing issues?
Yeah. Oh, no, yeah, crashing is critical, right? This is how apps live and die in reviews on the stores, if you crash too much there. But I'm happy to say that at Chase, I think we're doing pretty well. And I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back, because really Chase was already doing super well in the crash area before I joined. So there were a lot of infrastructure that had been put in place that makes our crash rates at the lowest I've ever seen in my career, even better than companies like Yahoo, which were already super impressive in how they were able to maintain the crash rate so low. So we're doing even better here. Again, my predecessors did better. So on one hand, it is we have constant focus on this, as in we monitor these numbers all the time. On the other hand, we barely go red on these numbers, so they're not really a huge focus or a huge drain on resources. Other things are than crash rates. And the number two, elephant in the room is performance. This is something that you can never have too much of, right? Crash rate, at some point you can think, all right, below that number, we're starting to have diminishing returns. We don't need to obsess over it. Basically, it's a user will see one crash every 3 years, something like that. All right, we don't need to worry about this anymore. Let's have toll gates, right? Let's have sonar gates and alerts that come up if something happens. But for the most part, we don't need to dedicate too much engineering power there. But performance is a daily battle. That battle never ends. It's an endless sink of resources, because as good as you are with performance at day zero, day one, you have hundreds of thousands of new lines of code that have gone into the app, and who knows what they're doing to performance.
I mean, one thing that I love to ask people on this topic is, I think anecdotally, we've been in the industry for a long time, and we have a feeling that generally, if apps or systems perform better, users are going to be happier and they're going to convert more and all of those things. But how do you prove it, right? It's like, from an industry perspective, we tend to claim that we're driven by numbers, I would love to hear from you, because you're so experienced. I have my own thoughts on this, but it's like, I guess what I'm asking is, you can spend the rest of your life working on performance, right? But obviously we would agree that you can, in certain areas, you can reach a point of diminishing returns, right? It's like, how do you know? It's like, what are you trying to measure? Like, how much of it is subjective versus objective, that you're trying to balance them against conversion metrics or those types of things?
Mm-hmm. For performance, a lot of it is quantitative, right? And when the numbers are there, the qualitative aspect follows. If your app is fast enough, your users are going to have the impression that, the app is responsive. Satisfaction of the user goes way beyond performance, right? It also has to do with the way your UI is structured, whether it's
Sure.
easy to use
Yep.
and all that. But in order to get there, it needs to be fast enough, right? When the user taps and launches the app and it takes 7 seconds before it displays something.
Yes.
And by the way, there are a few apps on the store right now on both
I'm
iOS and Android,
Very, very
which
well
have
aware. Yeah.
hundreds of millions of downloads, which literally take 5 seconds to display a static page.
Right.
So this is something that to me is unacceptable. So you need to start with the very basic of performance. First of all, the launch time is one thing. This is really the most important thing. Second, after that, be careful with the animation, the transition. Make sure that things are responsive. Once the user start using the app, widgets need to react pretty quickly, give feedback. Transition to new screen, new flows need to be quick. Animation, scrolling, make sure that there is no jank there, that there is no these jerky movements.
Right.
All of this matters a lot. And once you get all these checked, then you can look at the larger picture of how your app holds together. And for any app that is complex enough, you need to start paying very, very close attention to make sure that the app is consistent, that at least users can find their way easily, and if not, give them ways to find their way easily, and just not get in their way.
But then for your teams, do you drive a set of like 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 core numbers? And then do you like aggressively QA and test against those? And then I guess my follow-up question would be, how much of the performance measurement process is like the local releasing QA testing versus monitoring real world performance, right? Because obviously we know that, you can test on your emulator and your test phones all day, and then you get into the real world with limited RAM and disk space and different devices and all of those things, and things can go haywire. So would love to learn a little more about that.
Yeah, so you have to set goals for yourself, right? And these goals can be a bit arbitrary at first. If when you start the app, it takes 4 seconds, you're going to say, all right, by the end of the year, we need to be able to launch the app in 2 seconds.
Right.
And then when you get to that level, all right, let's push a little bit further, 1.5 seconds. But also keep an eye on when, like you said, it gets to a point where it's diminishing returns. You're spending way too much time and no longer getting a lot of benefits. So first of all, put these numbers in place. You can make them up out of thin air. You can look at some regular industry recommendations. You can also test other apps, either competitors or just other apps, see how well they fare in that area, and that will give you a target, right, to get there.
Yep.
So, but this is only half of the battle, like you said. Once you get there, how do you stay there? And this is the part that is still so difficult. So the way to do this is, like you said, now we have to have automated testing. So we have plenty of that in place. But the hard part is that there is a difference, like you said, when we test in QA, which has maybe a few hundreds of people at most, or we have beta testers, as opposed to the kind of volume that we ship whenever we release a new app at JP Morgan Chase, which is a complete different scale. And what we want is that the numbers that we measured in QA, which are kind of a prediction, we don't want them to be too different of when they are when we ship in production. And when we start having these numbers kind of match every time, we gain some confidence that at least we're not going to be completely blindsided by a release that is going to tank completely, and we did not see that coming. This is my nightmare.
Yeah, of course. So in the time that we have left, I would be not doing my job if I didn't ask you about the world of AI. And I don't know. I guess you can answer it either within the context of your job and how your teams are using it, or your own personal usage. I don't know. Just would love to learn from you on how you think things are going, and what you think the future holds there.
So it's no secret. Everybody uses AI. No, JP Morgan Chase is no different. We are very, very invested. We use it in a lot of different dimensions. I can't really go too much into it. Personally, I've been a believer from day one, even though the early results that we had were kind of underwhelming. But the few times where it got things right were really, really mind-blowing to me. And I kind of saw that, the potential there. I know how computer science works, is that these things don't get worse, they get better. And so it was pretty easy for me to project these good scenarios when things go very right, what it can be in 1, 2, 5, 10 years. Yeah. And so right away, I got immediately interested. I use it also in my personal coding. The ambiguity here is that I really appreciate all the help that I'm getting from AI, but I'm also afraid that it's going to atrophy my own skills, where you start becoming lazy. And instead of just writing the code myself, it's so easy to go to Claude and say, hey, write this, take a look at what it writes. And if it's only very, very often, it's close to the mark, right? It's 90% correct. I can still use my own personal brain to review the code. So I still feel that I'm participating. But it still leaves me hungry. Now, I haven't written a lot of code doing this, so I'm a bit ambivalent on my own usage, and I'm trying to have a clear separation between asking AI to write things that I don't really have a lot of interest in, or that I can do but that I find boring, versus writing things that are really interesting and challenging to me.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I would love to ask you, because I think about it a lot myself, is I'm one of those people where things have switched in the last 3 to 6 months. Like the tools have improved to the level that I don't write much code by hand anymore. Like I also use the tools. But you and I have been doing this for a really long time, and we know what good code and good systems are supposed to look like because we've written a lot of them ourselves. And the part that concerns me the most, and I'd love to learn what you think about this, is that we're not going to be working forever, right? So it's like, what about the next generation of people? How are they going to learn? And I am not one of the people out there who believes that software engineering is dying. I think these are tools. I think they're amazing tools, and I think we're going to need as many engineers as we ever did to actually wrangle the tools. But I just don't understand how you train new people who've never done it. And I would just love to learn from you for whatever you're willing to say, because you must hire a lot of people at JP Morgan, so you're probably thinking about this. And it's like, I'm just trying to understand, like, how do you think about skill development in this new world?
Mm-hmm. I'm worried. Not for me, like you said. For you and me, we're kind of, we have a few more years to go, and
right.
Maybe AI will kill our job now, but I'm more. I have kids, who are approaching college, who will be, hitting the workforce at some point in the next few years. I'm worried about, what's going to happen to them, whether they're going to have, like me, the opportunity to work in something that they're really passionate about and that they can really make a good living of.
Right.
I feel incredibly lucky to be able to do these two things at the same time: something that I feel passionate about and something that allows me to have a living. I hope that they'll be able to do this, but you're right. I mean, we're seeing a transformation. Software engineering is not going away, but it's going to be very different in 10 years from now. I don't really have a good visibility, to be honest. I know some people are saying, well, the new code is going to be prompt, right? It's going to be able to specify code in English or in these markdown files, and then after this, you just let the AI generate everything. After all, this is what compilers do, right? For a long time, we've asked compilers to generate code that we never look at, and we trust them. I think there is something to that parallel, but it's not perfect because AI right now is not as predictable as compilers, for example. But we have been relying on AI to generate things that we don't comprehend or don't really have the mental capacity to look at for a while now. So I think now we're seeing this in a different magnitude, right? It's going to be a very transformational. What it's going to look like in 10 years from now, I have no idea. I will probably not be working anymore back then, so I'll be looking from the sideline. But I'm both worried and excited about being in one of these and other pivotal moments. Because another one was the internet, right? You and I were there when the internet happened, which is from a civilization standpoint, it was transformational. Things were never the same. I think we're going to witness another thing now in AI in the 10 years that are coming.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it is incredible technology, and it's not going anywhere. And I think even if we are in a bubble, which I think we are, I think like the internet era, even if the bubble pops, this is very real technology that is going to stay. But this one to me is different because I feel like we're right now, to drive the tools well, we are relying on people that have a lot of experience to drive the tools and get those productivity boosts. And when you don't have the experience, it's not as clear to me how do you bridge that gap. So I think it's a problem that the industry is going to increasingly face. So that's probably as good a place as any to end, but would love to just see if you have any parting thoughts. Is there anything that you'd love to leave people with before we go?
Not really. It was a pleasure talking to you. Myself, still very excited about my profession. I'm still very much, in love with the technology and computers and coding and all aspects of coding. And I hope I get to do this for a lot longer. And with this new addition that is AI. And thank you for having me.
No, thank you very much for joining. And we spent this whole time not talking about Rust, and I know that you're a Rust fan, so we could have spent more time on that. But there's only so many minutes. So thank you so much for joining. This was a fantastic conversation. So that's a wrap for this episode of Beyond the Noise: Signals, Stories, and Spicy Takes. Huge thanks to Cedric for joining and sharing his story. You can find this episode and all past ones on the Bitdrift YouTube channel. If you had fun, drop us a review, tell your friends, or yell your favorite hot take into the void, and just make sure to tag us. I'm Matt Klein, and I will see you next time. Thank you.